Please welcome Merri Sanchez, Senior Director of Space Exploration Systems for Sierra Nevada Corporation.
Good morning. This morning I'd like to talk to you about following your dreams and how America can build spaceships. America is #1 in space, which a lot of people seem to forget. Found Luisa's video a little bit interesting about NASA. They've shut their doors. They've gone away from home. Well, America still builds spaceships. We started with the innovation. Two brothers, the Wright brothers, back in 1903 started together. They were bicycle repairmen, and they got together and they says, we can do this flight thing. We can innovate and we can achieve. They did. This went on to the Cold War during the Apollo era, where we had the megalith of a rocket out here on the launch pad here, and we had our nation's heroes walk on the moon. In 1969, I was a 7-year-old watching a little grainy black and white TV and said, wow, this is great. I want to grow up. I want to be a test pilot. I want to be an astronaut. I want to work for NASA. I want to go to Mars, and I want to do all of these things in my lifetime. I was really lucky. In high school, got to see the first Mars lander, got to see the pictures, the great landscapes. We just landed our most recent rover on Mars in, 3 weeks ago, the Curiosity rover. And we're still trying to achieve. And one of the things that we really want to make sure that America remembers is they are a spacefaring nation, and we will get back to space. We have a mission. This mission is to send humans to space, to send humans to do exploration, to do science, to do research. And we believe that America can get back there. Some of these vehicles will launch from the Kennedy Space Center. They will climb back once to orbit from this coast. They'll go on to orbit. They will dock to the space station. They'll remain on the space station as a rescue vehicle in order to bring home the crews in case of an emergency. They'll come back. They'll deorbit. And they'll come and land here at the Kennedy Space Center. You'll have the crews come out. They'll be able to bring their payloads out, bring their science out, and come back and recycle and go to another launch. So we can build spaceships. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is an innovative partnership in spaceship building. You see the space shuttle here, which is one of the most magnificent flying machines ever built. I was actually lucky enough to work for NASA for 25 years, spent a lot of time down here supporting the launch processing, the runway landings, getting to go see the space shuttle, getting to crawl through it. I had the opportunity to actually come and climb into the space shuttle to help pull cargo off right after it was landing, where you could still smell space. You could also smell 2 weeks of people without showers when you went in there. But it was a marvelous flying machine. It was great, and it's unfortunate that we actually, as a nation, had to choose to retire the space shuttle, but there are other future spaceships coming. They're being built by multiple companies. Some of them are in the traditional contracting methods, things like the Orion spaceship, where Lockheed is building it for NASA using traditional government contracts, requirements, acceptance. That's how the space shuttle was built. That's how Apollo was built. That's how many of the other spacecraft would have been built in this nation. The other thing that's happening right now is a commercial crew program where there are right now 3 companies working to do things a little bit more innovatively, to work in a partnership with NASA, where these companies co-invest with NASA. Each of the companies have brought forth their own money and their own ideas, and they're designing a spaceship that will meet NASA requirements, but will also serve other markets, and hopefully will commercialize space. One of the neat things about the way that the commercial crew program works is NASA gives companies money, gives them requirements. They say, go build me this spaceship that will do these things. But then the companies have an opportunity to come back to NASA. The expertise in human spaceflight lies within NASA. The propulsion expertise, the rendezvous and docking expertise, the launch, the landing, all of those areas rely within NASA. Here at Kennedy Space Center, here at some of the other centers, Johnson Space Center, Goddard, Marshall, all of those places have a world-class workforce. The contracting mechanism with the commercial spaceflight actually allows the companies to reach back into NASA, which is a very innovative way for the government to do business. The government says, okay, there's some things that we can do better, and we can actually contract back out to you, the contractor, to allow you to get the best in class, the best available. One of the spaceships that's being built is the Dream Chaser. This one's kind of an interesting because it actually started in a very circuitous route. Back in the 1980s, the Russians saw the space shuttle and says, this is really neat. We wish that we had a vehicle that could go to space, come back, launch, land on a runway. They invented what they called the Bohr 4 spaceplane. This spacecraft was actually designed to be a space-based fighter plane. It was going to launch with a crew of one. The original concept was you would put 2 or 3 in a launch vehicle, and they would go up and they would do war in space. They would protect space, they would protect their assets. Well, back in the 80s, we happened to get some photographs of it back in the height of the Cold War when everybody spied on everybody and took pictures of everything. And the US government went to NASA and says, okay, we just saw this thing. What does it do? So NASA Langley actually went, they built it, and they says, ooh, this is pretty good. They went and made some improvements, did a lot of wind tunnel testing, did a lot of piloting, handling evaluations. And in the early 90s, actually came up with a concept that would be a crew return vehicle for the space station. NASA being NASA, they changed their mind. They actually ended up funding a different program, which I worked as a NASA engineer, called the X-38, also using a lifting body. But this was all heritage NASA work. And so the Dream Chaser is based on NASA heritage work, taking benefit of what's already been done. We talked about the Russians. From the United States to Russia, there was a lot of lifting body work going on, a lot of lifting body testing. The X-38 that I mentioned was actually based on the X-24 shape, which was flown by the Air Force. It was flown both suborbital flights as well as crewed flights. And NASA actually built that and tested it in the 90s. And you see some of the other vehicles they've tested. And I like this because you see the little video going on. If you look on the left side of the picture, those are all pictures taken from the air. Those were taken from an Australian P-3 of where the Russians went, or where the Australians saw the Russians recovering something from the ocean. And they went and took pictures. This is where the original pictures that they sent to NASA to look at were coming from. If you look on the right, it's actually the pictures that the Russians did of the recovery. And in one of the views, you'll actually see the P-3 overflying. So you actually see the full circle of each side taking pictures of what they're doing. I'm a home-built pilot. I've helped build 2 airplanes. I'm building a 3rd airplane. I really love flying. I love building when I fly. One of the really great things about this new innovative partnership is it allows you to build a little, to test a little, to fly a little. And in that process, you bring up the innovation of the engineers. You've heard talk about collaboration, about innovation, about involving people in the decision-making process. What you see here is what is called an engineering test article. It was used for captive carry flights, and it'll be used for release flights at the end of the year. One of the great things about this type of a partnership is you allow your engineers to actually do hands-on work. We had painting parties late at night where we actually had managers drilling holes to install the final aeroshells. We had engineers working with paint, trying to get the vehicle all painted, doing the hands-on work, to where they actually felt ownership and commitment in the product that they were building. See, great scenery. Turns out Colorado is a great place to do test flights. Most people think of Edwards Air Force Base, which is actually a great place to do test flights too, out at the Dryden Flight Research Center. The captive carry of this vehicle was done just east of Boulder, Colorado. One interesting thing is you look for a great big area when you're doing something. It was helicopter flight. You look for a great big area when you're carrying a helicopter that has no population, no people. There's this little place near Boulder called Rocky Flats where they used to make plutonium. There are no people there, so it's a really good place to fly over, but you really don't want to land there. And so you can see the helicopter. You don't get to see the barren ground where they've scooped up all the earth from this view. So we are looking at America staying in space, America returning to space, and America back to having human spacecraft, to where we don't rely on other assets, where we look at innovative and collaborative approaches towards partnerships. One thing to remember is that while NASA is doing this for the first time, this is actually in the history of America. When you look at the original airlines, that they were all Started out with some input from government funding with the companies doing their own resources, then turning it into a commercially viable business. And you look at airlines and you look at airmail. Government started out funding all of the airmail. It went city to city, landmark to landmark, to deliver that. Now you have FedEx and UPS doing it all commercially, where it is a completely viable business. And so there are different ways to do business. There are different ways to do innovative collaborative partnerships between the government and between industry that bring value to the government, that bring value to the taxpayer, because there's a lot less government dollars and some corporate dollars invested to where you end up with a cheaper, more innovative, and just as good and just as safe of a product. And with that, I think we're ready for our next one.